This
So
conference will now be recorded.
when we talk about priorities, this is often about us understanding the difference between things that are important and things which are urgent. And the content that I'm going to refer to, I don't know if any of you have actually come across the book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. If not, I encourage you. It's a great lockdown book or something to listen to. Some of these will be familiar if you're familiar with that book, because I trained on that for many, many years. And I felt that the approach that Covey advocates to do with prioritization is one of the most useful. And what he says is too many of us feel that we prioritize based on the clock, almost like what's the most urgent, what shouts the loudest, what needs to be done right now. And they're not always the most important things. Important things are the things that take us in the direction that we want to go. So, like a compass, if we want to go due north, are we spending time or prioritizing the things that actually take us in the direction that we want to go? Now, of course, the question is understanding which direction do we want to go in terms of work, in terms of being productive at work, and also at home. And of course, most of us are in this hybrid circumstance, which actually Seven Habits is all about, work-life balance as well, where we're having to prioritize both of those things in exactly the same workspace. So, thinking to yourself about what might be important, I'm going to ask you in a moment what sort of things feel important to you. I've just come up with some simple examples myself. So, important to us is making sure that my team, so I'm a manager, so I know it's really important to make sure that I keep in contact with my team in order to make sure that they have the support they need and also that they're focused. So as line managers, we do need to make sure that the people in this very confusing times, people know what to focus on. So that's an important way in which something I need to schedule time in to do that. I'm launching a book. So we've got that launching on the 20th of May. So obviously there's work to do in terms of planning that book launch. So that's important. And that's, as time goes on, starting to become important and urgent. G-Cloud application is like a tender thing. Again, not something that I necessarily enjoy doing. In fact, I don't in the slightest, but it's something that's important because it allows us to be visible to customers. And so I need to do that as well. But it's not urgent yet because the deadline's been pushed out to July. And actually exercise. So putting in a personal aspect, it is important because that's about well-being. If I want to get out of this lockdown and wear something other than tracksuit bottoms, it's probably important for me to actually prioritize some time doing daily exercise. So those things are a mixture of important things, and it might be also spending time with my loved ones. There's lots of other things that are important, both with our work hats on and our home hats. Now, urgent stuff isn't always important, or sometimes it's important and urgent. So if I've put a new podcast live on a Monday morning, I want to publicize it as soon as possible. So I have to act on that on the Monday morning. When I was doing the slides, that became urgent, updating slides, because I've got a deadline of the webinar to happen. Thankfully, this has gone now, but we did have the urgent furloughing staff a month ago in terms of getting some stuff set up so we could take advantage of the furlough scheme. And yes, stopping the kids from fighting generally can be urgent. It's not something necessarily I want to do, but it's something that's urgent. So you get a sense of what those things are. If you put your work hats on, I'm interested to know what things are important for you now, or do you know? Give us some examples. And one of the ways of thinking about this is most of you, I'm sure, have got objectives in the workplace. The reality is that the objectives are often annual or maybe quarterly. Lots of people find that they are still relevant, but you need to make shorter term goals of them. But actually, are there other things that have become important? It's actually a really good time, if you have got objectives, that you might even want to refine them or revisit them with your team to make sure that they're relevant. Because actually, in the workplace, our performance objectives would in principle be the things that we consider to be important, that are our compass, right? So going north is doing the things that are priorities within our job role and actually objectives that we may want. Great. So regular catch up with your account. Absolutely. So Dee's an account manager, aren't you? So staying in contact with your accounts is an important activity. Absolutely. It's not urgent, but it is absolutely important. Regular communication with apprentices, says Annie, and checking on their well-being. I think and like Rachel's also saying, keeping in touch with team. They are really, really valuable at the moment. We know that one of the big risks of this is potential mental health issues in the future. So checking in and having that relationship with either the people you manage or the people that you work with or your customers, having that human relationship is definitely something to prioritize at the moment. And it can feel like it takes longer. It doesn't have to all be done on Zoom. I know we can get a bit of fatigue of these. So it's great that we've put these down. And interestingly, when I run this sort of course with managers in the workplace in the old days, pre-coronavirus, quite often those things didn't occur to managers. It would be much more, I've got to do this task, I've got to complete this project, I've got to achieve this sales target, I've got to update this policy. It was much more task oriented, and very often people didn't think about the actual human aspect. So it's great that those are the things that have come up. Now, have you got other things that are important, maybe to do with tasks or projects? If you think about objectives that you may have in the workplace, what sort of things are you doing? I had previously people were looking at things like, I know, policies. Often you might find that you have got long-term projects that need to be done. They're not always the most exciting things, but you know it'll make you more effective in the long term. So quite often, so for example, updating user guides or ensuring that all policies are updated is a great time to schedule in things that are actually going to make us more effective when we go back to normal. Because in the normal life, we are so busy. There are often tasks that we know we should do, often to do with improvements, let's say business improvement. We know that if we followed a process better, we would, and more effectively, we would be more effective longer term, but we never have time to stop and reflect on how that process could be improved or how we could standardize things. Great, so I've got some updating contacts on product knowledge, absolutely. Making sure that we've got those sort of, it could be about learning or improving our product knowledge, updating management plans, all of these things, reviewing strategies. Strategy is a great call, Caroline. So often strategy is something that really does make a difference. So it's something in my earphones at the moment. I'm just not sure if it's all, everyone's on mute. Yes, sorry, just so that's a great one in terms of think about something strategic. Those tend to be long term. Have you got a strategy or a plan, whether it's for you yourself personally and things you want to achieve, or are there things within your role that you want to achieve? So thinking a little bit longer term and then thinking, right, what could I do right now? Maybe you want to write a book. Could you do a book plan while you're here? So having a think about those sort of bigger aspects of that, if you worked on them now, you'd reap the benefits in the future. Designing a new training course, updating training information or induction plans, all of those sort of things that thinking a bit longer, could we come up with these important things that will help us in the long term and then schedule them in? And Covey says it's about scheduling those priorities in rather than prioritizing our schedule. Because I feel at this stage in the lockdown, it's really easy to sit down and go, okay, I've got just as many emails as I used to have. I've got just as many I've got items on my to-do list. I've got umpteen Skype messages, and I could be reactive all day and be busy, but have I actually been productive? And so it's really key to go, am I going to schedule some time in to think about what are the activities that I can do which would make me more productive long term? And that's the key here. So thinking of those important things that you came up with, and think of others by all means. Then, of course, you can think about how do I balance those in and how much effort am I putting into each of these? I've got a highly sophisticated image, as you can see ahead, and what I thought it was easier for me just to draw it. So this is a really simple tool. You can draw yourself a circle and you could identify different priorities. So on here, I've got some priorities here in terms of the business. So it might be about trying to generate revenue, marketing and prospecting. So that might be a certain aspect in terms of sales and marketing. Am I having enough, putting enough effort into quality family time, fitness and health? So more about myself. Then, so actually make myself and my family, then more here about self and family relaxation. Am I taking time to relax? Because some people are finding they can't get away from their desks. Am I helping others to be productive? And then over here, am I developing myself, and am I spending enough time managing my team? Those are just priorities, important activities in a mixture of home and work that I've put into this grid. And what you can do is then actually assess to what degree you think that at the moment, how much effort am I doing into revenue generation, and how much do I want to do? If you assume that the top is here, you want to be up here, and then you can see the gap. So the idea then is that, okay, so I know I need to do a bit more effort in revenue generating activities. So I might follow up all of our old contacts. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to schedule that in for Friday morning. And when I sit down at my desk, I will sit down and spend a good couple of hours following up sales contacts and the same sort of thing. So it's a really simple concept, but it's a really good way of visualizing how we can be more productive and just a bit less reactive. This is the quadrant. It's known as the Eisenhower quadrant. I'm sure a number of you have seen it. Do let me know if you're very familiar with it. Let me know if you know this in the comments. So Covey talks about importance being at the top. So quadrants 1 and 2 are important, and then urgency being over on the left. So in normal times, whenever I've run this as a training course, I have found that people tend to be focused on the things. Oh, I've still got my pen drawings. People tend to be focused over here in our quadrant 1. This tends to be where we spend lots of time. And if we're lucky, we spend a bit of time in quadrant 2, but more likely we start to be driven by urgency. Because I'm in a habit and everything, I've not really quite got enough time to do anything. I'm rushing around doing everything. If someone comes and asks me to do something that's not important but urgent, do you know what? I'll probably end up doing that. So you have this sort of sphere of time where we're stuck in quadrant 1 and maybe quadrant 3. And I'll put the definitions in of what fits into each quadrant. The problem with that means that we're too busy then to spend any time in quadrant 2. And as you can see here in quadrant 2, we've got planning, prevention, development, and relaxation. That means we get stressed and we get burnout because we don't have any time to relax. It also means that we carry on making the same mistakes that we've always made because we don't put the time into preventing issues happening again. So the goal is, if we want to be more productive, more effective, we need to prioritize quadrant 2 activities. In theory, because we are at home and we're not commuting and life is out of the norm, in theory, we should be able to schedule these in, possibly more than we can in normal times, in inverted commas. The challenge, of course, is have we got into the habits of being in 1 and 3? We also know that you have got the stress and strain if you've got kids, that actually we find that we're unable to get away from some quadrant 3 things. So some of the quadrant 3 things would be classically kids interrupting you and other things like that. There's lots of stuff. They are important to you, but they're probably not helping you to be productive. So those challenges can take place as well. Covey entitles these quadrants different names. Let me get rid of the highlighting if I possibly can. My drawing tools don't seem to want to switch off, which is a bit strange. Here we go. So Covey calls these this quadrant 1, the quadrant of necessity. We all have urgent and important activities. Quadrant 2 is our quadrant of effectiveness. So if we want to be effective, we need to prioritize some of these important things, and then you have that satisfaction when you've actually applied time to it. The challenge with some of these important things, like updating park management plans, they may not be that interesting. They don't shout at you like quadrant 1 and quadrant 3 tasks do. So it requires us to have a bit more discipline to actually focus on them. And my suggestion is absolutely schedule them in, put them in your diary, manage everything, switch off all of the interruptions, don't book a Zoom meeting on those, make sure that all the things that would probably intrude into you, make sure that you have that headspace, and also think about when the right time of day for you is. For me, it's very first thing in the morning. For some people, it might be last thing at night. And schedule those things in. And schedule, I don't know, if you could schedule 4 to 6 hours of highly effective time a week, you will feel much more in control, and you can support your people as well to do this. And again, this all links back to mental health and well-being, because if we are scheduling priorities and actually managing to fulfill those, we are controlling what we can control in difficult circumstances, and we can get that sort of sense of positivity and control. The downside, of course, is if we end up sticking in quadrant 1, we can end up, we're so busy. As I say, we then end up spending time in quadrant 3, which is a quadrant of deception. And then we're exhausted, we go and sit on the sofa and drink too much wine, watch too many box sets, and that's a quadrant 4, a quadrant of excess. And then tomorrow we feel so exhausted, we just go straight into quadrant 1 and just do the urgent stuff. Effectively cutting out our effectiveness. So the big challenge really is looking at this. The analogy is often Covey talks about it as big rocks. I'm sure many of you have heard that. If not, you can Google. There's a lovely 80s video out there on big rocks. And what we need to do is take the viewpoint that the big rocks, or the important things, if we schedule them into our diaries first, then we will still have time to fit the quadrant 1 and quadrant 3 stuff around them. If we just let quadrant 1 and quadrant 3 happen, we will run out of time to do the quadrant 2 stuff. And that's the principle behind all of this. We do need to think holistically. It's not just about priorities, hence on my list, think about yourself in terms of your well-being, think about your people, think about maybe your career, your long-term future, think about balance. So you may need to prioritize all kinds of things in this context. So we're having to prioritize supermarket shops to a different extent than you would have done before. So there's lots and lots of priorities that we might be scheduling. And I really encourage you to think about yourself, prioritize your own self-care as one of them. And actually, we'll pop out a link to this. When the team will send out a link to this if it's of help. I have done a podcast on prioritizing self-care. So if this is something that's of interest to you, that might be a good podcast to listen to. And there's some downloads as well, which might be of use. Now, the challenge, of course, is how do we say no to those things that are quadrant 3 and 4? It would be really great if some of you might suggest in the chat what sort of things are quadrant 3, which is not important but urgent for you, or quadrant 4. Which things do you think pull you away from what it is that you want to do? And then perhaps we can put on there the chat also how we might say no to some of these things. So who can think of something which is a time thief that deceives us? I certainly imagine that it started out as an absolutely fantastic thing, some of the Zoom meetings, but I wonder if some of these things can become slight thieves. So do comment, chuck in your comments. Let's see if anyone's going to suggest a quadrant 3 activity. Typical things that people would say if I was in a training course, they would say some meetings, some interruptions. It's hard if you're in, say, a customer focused role where you're trying to get on with something and people come in and interrupt you. But actually, if you are in a reactive role, actually that's what we have to do the whole time. Everyone's shy. No one's giving me any items that they're saying no to. Okay, so the sort of things might be interruptions. Oh, thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. Yes, proofreading other people's work. Someone did that to me this morning. He said, "Oh, I haven't got time to do this proposal," and I'd sent a template over and going, "Oh, that is just a monkey on my back." Sometimes these things that someone else could do, rectifying mistakes made by others, it's difficult, isn't it? So those are really good. Team or others popping over to ask questions instead of saying it in the meeting or scheduling it. Yes, those sorts of interruptions. And actually, I suppose in some ways now, if they're coming through on Skype, then that does really help, that you can at least ignore them. And so those are great. So we've got some great. So checking things, they have to be done. Is it important? I think you can argue some of those are important if the consequences of them not being right is poor. But the classic with those ones, rectifying mistakes made by others, proofing e-learning and other people's works, what we would probably say that we should do to try and minimize that is, yes, okay, if something's got to go out quickly, I might do it for someone. Do we schedule in the time to feed back to them about their errors in a constructive way, or encouraging people to, I don't know, would it be use a spell check or read things through? I guess it depends on whether it's actually your role or not, as to whether it's something you feel that is a good use of time. But certainly when other people waste our time, the thing to do, which is a quadrant 2 activity, is invest the time, if we possibly can, to teach them how to stop doing it. That's the challenge. Pippa said she works for several companies and gets to do work for one and get phone calls from another. That's difficult, isn't it? Particularly if you're independent, because they're all important to you, but the other company needs you to prioritize their time at a time. The classic is about saying no nicely to people as well. Sometimes people might, as I say, pass a monkey over to you, which I had this morning, and I thought, oh, I think I might push. What you can do, you can do it, or you can say, would it be okay if I do it next week? I haven't got time to do it today. And quite often people will actually go, oh, don't worry. So often if you're a very helpful person, you might find that your time gets, you get more time these than someone else, whereas the unhelpful people don't. They get to get on with things because they're not very helpful. So maybe be aware of, are you overly helpful sometimes? Do you try to do things for people? Because people will take advantage of that. And so, we can very nicely say, actually, I'm really involved in something today and tomorrow, but I can look at it for you on Monday, if that's all right. And if it isn't quick enough for them, then actually they can go and find someone else to do it. And often they will. So this is about us respecting our time and maybe pushing back nicely to others. Interruptions is about us trying to create a good working space, a good working environment, asking others not to disturb us within certain areas. And I think also making sure that we're really aware of distractions. I hide my phone, put it out of my eyesight, because somehow I feel that sometimes I'm aware of it in my periphery, and I pick something up, even if I pick up to look at an address or something in my calendar, and I get distracted in social media. So it's quite useful to have something like that to put it out of sight, so that you're not getting distracted by things. So sometimes saying no nicely to 3 and 4, or maybe just having that awareness of when we are being interrupted or having time taken away from us. So saying no to those things, if you know what's important and what your priorities are and what you knew you really wanted to get done, that quadrant 2 time, it is also easier to say no to those things, because you realize that it's going to take you away from something that is more valuable. We can minimize distractions, which I've mentioned just now. We can ensure that any virtual meetings that we do have agendas, are structured and keep to time. So a really good example of that is one of my colleagues. We've been having a social chat on a Thursday at 2 o'clock, and it started out as a social one, and then it became really quite unstructured and possibly a bit of a time waster for people, because they've got used to working from home. They don't necessarily need the sort of social check-in for the sake of it anymore. So this time we're going to run it, and we've developed some slides, and we're going to make it a 10-15 minute update. So as we've gone through the lockdown, you might find that new habits have sprung up in terms of meetings. Maybe it's about taking a step back. Do we still need to do it like that? Could we structure it? Are we making sure that we are being effective using that time? Try to give yourself an achievable structure or routine, and negotiate if needed. And the other technique that works for quite a few people, you may or may not have come across, is called the Pomodoro technique, which is about working in 25-minute bursts. So effectively, you set yourself a timer, and you commit to focusing on a specific task for 25 minutes, and then you take a 5-minute break. And so that can be something that just recharges you, whether that break is spent on social media, or going for a walk, or making a cup of coffee, whatever it might be. And you can then schedule your quadrant 2 activities in chunks of Pomodoros. So let's say 90 minutes is an optimum time to review a strategy. So you might block yourself that 90 minutes in your diary and do it in chunks of Pomodoro to keep yourself fresh. The things that I think stop us from spending more time in quadrant 2 is we don't know what's important. So again, if you manage people, maybe you can help make sure that they have clarity of what their priorities are. Maybe we haven't got any goals or focus, whether they're personal goals or our objectives haven't been set or they're not relevant. Maybe we don't feel motivated. It can be quite hard. It might not be very motivational, in which case maybe you need to set yourself a reward for doing something, or consider how you can be motivated to take part in that activity. Usually if it's important to you in terms of something that you want to achieve longer term. So you can get motivated on it, but sometimes it's hard to get started. And my advice for people, if you find it hard to get started, is make sure you diarize it in, and you know what it is that you need to do in that time. So you take away the objectives. If I say that quadrant 2 is me going to the gym in the morning, then what I would do is put my gym gear on my stool in my room. So first thing in the morning, it's there. I don't have to hunt through drawers. I don't have to think about it. As soon as you have to engage your brain in order to talk yourself out of doing something, then that's not helpful. So make it as easy as possible. Remove obstacles for yourself when you want to spend time in quadrant 2. Addiction to urgency is much more rewarding. Many of us are absolutely addicted to urgency. That is only getting worse in terms of the immediacy of information, in terms of, you click on your social media and you've got umpteen WhatsApps, updates, whatever your social media is. So those things are addictive. So it does take greater discipline, and we have to almost practice exercising our discipline muscles in order to get better at spending time in quadrant 2. But the rewards are massive. And again, distractions or environment, we can certainly help ourselves by doing that. So once you know what your priorities are, make sure you're motivated to do it. Take away those distractions in terms of urgency, particularly social media type things, and control your environment. And you're not doing it forever. You're not going to be in quadrant 2 all day, every day. It's just some of the time. But those chunks of time will be hugely fulfilling, and you will have the satisfaction that you are being more productive and taking yourself somewhere that you want to go, particularly when life goes back to normal as well, if it ever does. But you feel that you've been really highly productive, and your people have too. So just wrapping up, the next slide is just a summary of the rest of the webinars. That was the content that I wanted to share with you about priorities. I hope it was of interest to you. I'd love to hear any of you who's going to share a work or home priority and explain how you might do that. If you'd be happy to comment, what sort of things do you think you might do as a result of this? Is there anything that you thought, actually, I know I'm going to schedule in some time first thing in the morning, or I'm going to try the Pomodoro technique? What things do you feel would be useful to you in terms of taking this away? Just pop those in the comments, and I'll read some of those out for everybody. And I will try using the quadrant. Was that the first time you've seen the quadrant, Brian? The 7 habit, the Covey quadrant. I think it's one of the things about this sort of development. Often, if you've been on a time management course, you would have seen it. And it's one of those you haven't seen, or you have seen before, but you haven't used. Great. So you're going to actually go for it. Brilliant. Pip's going to try the Pomodoro technique. Yeah, do you know, my kids like doing the Pomodoro technique, Rachel. Although I actually sometimes prefer a slightly longer. You could do 45 minutes, but my daughter's doing that, and they then do that and then go and do 5 minutes table tennis. So that's their piece, which is it's good actually. The other thing is there is an app that kids use, which on their phone, that if you pick your phone up, I've forgotten what it's called, Leaf or something. If you pick your phone up when you set yourself the time to work, then it's got a tree growing and it kills the tree, so it encourages you not to go on your phone when you should. It's called Forest, is it? That's it. Okay, so there's an app called Forest. Good for kids, maybe good for adults who are getting distracted by their phone. Kate already schedules time in her diary for tasks, but she's going to try Pomodoro. Leslie's going to review her daily team chat. Right, you've been having them on a daily call 6 weeks now. Maybe it's time. That's a good call. So maybe 3 times a week, maybe twice a week. Yeah, that's a possibility. Brilliant. Thanks, guys. It's really nice of you to comment, and it's helpful to share some other ideas. By all means, pop some ideas in. Laura, is that Laura that I know? Let me know if it's you, Laura. Laura, ex of Convatec. And here's the other webinars. So if you're interested in other webinars, here they are. Next week at the same time, we're going to do one about effectively working remotely. I'm trying to think about the difference in content of this one. The learning objectives are on the link, so we'll send those out. It is a different course, but I'm trying to remember what that one is. Supporting our teams through the change curve, that's a new one, so all about dealing with change. And then goal setting is about setting objectives. So if people in your team or you want to set objectives better, it's just going into a little bit more depth. Hi, Laura. Nice to meet you again. Nice to see you. It's about maximising remote productivity. Thank you, Helen. Helen has reminded me the effective working remotely is the kind of top 10 tips for effective home working. You might find that everyone's got beyond that now. We've been running it now for about a month or 6 weeks. But if not, it is something that anyone's appropriate for. So if you've got your team, you can actually put team members onto it or recommend it to other colleagues. We will send the links out to you if they're of interest to you. If you'd like to join my virtual book launch on the 20th of May, you'd be very, very welcome. We're working on the details at the moment, and the book, if you're interested in change, how to be a change superhero. Laura, you will recognise one of the case studies in there, not named, but how to be a change superhero is out on the 21st of May, and there'll be a 99p Kindle version if that's something you're interested in. So thank you so much for joining this afternoon. I hope you do manage to take something away. And I think if all of us can come out feeling we've been a bit effective during lockdown and helping our teams to do that, then they will feel better. It is key to well-being, being productive. I'm not saying we have to be productive all day, every day, but it is a great way of feeling like you're in control if you've allocated things. So any questions, feel free to put in the chat. Otherwise, that's it, guys. And thank you for joining me again, if you have done, or feel free to join me on future webinars as well. Thanks, guys. Yes, Laura, we'll send the slides out, and we'll send a link. I've videoed this. We'll send you a link to the video. So it will either come out later on this afternoon or tomorrow. Okay, I'm just going to close it down now, but feel free to get in contact if anyone wants to speak further.